It all happened so fast, a betrayal so deep it carved a chasm to the very bedrock of my life. But looking back, I realized the foundation was crumbling long before the first crack appeared. This isn't just a story I heard or a tale spun for entertainment. This is my life, how I, Elara Vance, at 65 years old, watched everything I built collapse, only to rise from the rubble, brick by painstaking brick, to put my former boss, Valerius Croft, behind bars. The day he stole my life's work, the day Valerius Croft publicly unveiled the Verdant Spire as his own brainchild, a cold, metallic taste filled my mouth. The tang of betrayal, acrid and unforgettable. My career, my legacy, my entire future, snatched away in a single audacious lie, leaving me adrift, a ghost in the city I'd helped to shape, staring at a screen where my dreams, my very soul, were being paraded as someone else's triumph. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My world, for nearly 4 decades, had been the towering steel and glass canyons of Chicago. The wind, sharp and invigorating, was a constant companion, whipping through my hair as I walked the city streets, my eyes always drawn upwards, dissecting the angles, tracing the lines of human ingenuity reaching for the sky. Architecture wasn't just a profession for me. It was a calling, a language I spoke fluently, a canvas where I painted futures. And my canvas for the last 10 years had been Archeon Dynamics. Archeon wasn't just another firm. It was a titan, a name synonymous with innovation and the relentless pursuit of aesthetic perfection. I had started there as a junior architect, fresh out of the Illinois Institute of Technology, brimming with an idealism that, even at 65, hadn't entirely faded. I'd worked my way up, project by project, late night by late night, from drafting intricate residential complexes to leading the design of some of the city's most recognizable commercial landmarks. My signature, though unseen, was etched into the very skyline. Colleagues knew my reputation. Meticulous, unwavering, a problem solver who could coax beauty from the most challenging structural constraints. My office on the 40th floor was a testament to this devotion, overflowing with blueprints, models, samples of sustainable materials, and a panoramic view of Lake Michigan that always reminded me of the boundless possibilities of design. My personal life was, by most standards, quiet. I never married, never had children. My family was a collection of cherished friends, my 2 beloved rescue cats, and the sprawling, intricate tapestry of my work. There were no regrets, only a deep satisfaction in the knowledge that I had poured my heart and soul into something tangible, something that would endure long after I was gone. My retirement, still a few years off, was a comfortable horizon, secured by a solid pension and the promise of consultancy work. I envisioned myself finally taking that solo trip through Patagonia, perhaps even teaching a master class at my old alma mater. But before all that, there was the Verdant Spire. The spire wasn't just a building. It was my magnum opus, the culmination of everything I had learned, dreamed, and innovated. It was a vision for urban living that integrated ecological sustainability with groundbreaking structural design, a towering residential complex crowned with a multi-level vertical farm, its facades breathing with living plant walls, its internal systems powered by advanced geothermal and solar arrays. It wasn't just green, it was alive. It was designed to address urban food deserts, to mitigate the heat island effect, to prove that concrete and nature could coexist in harmony, elevate each other. I had poured a decade of my life into its concept, its intricate engineering, its aesthetic soul. It was my legacy, the capstone of a lifetime dedicated to shaping the built environment. We were just weeks away from a final, internal review before presenting it to the City Planning Commission and potential investors. The buzz around Archeon was palpable. This was going to be the project that cemented our firm's place in history. And I, Elara Vance, was its architect. Then came Valerius Croft. He arrived at Archeon 3 years ago, a whirlwind of polished charm and undeniable ambition. He was a prodigal son, not a founder, but a major investor, parachuted in as the new head of development. He was young, perhaps 38 at the time, with a sharp jawline, eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a smile that could disarm a bank vault. His suits were always impeccable, his words always perfectly chosen. He had an uncanny ability to make you feel like the most important person in the room, even as you suspected he was subtly assessing your weaknesses. At first, I saw him as a promising, if slightly green talent. He had a knack for networking, for navigating the labyrinthine world of finance and politics, areas where I, an architect first and foremost, was less inclined to dabble. He expressed immense admiration for my work, particularly for the Verdant Spire. Elara, he'd say, leaning against my desk, a glint in his eye, what you're doing here is revolutionary. Truly, it's going to change everything. His praise, though flattering, always felt a little too effusive, a little too rehearsed. But I dismissed it. My focus was on the structure, the materials, the physics, not on parsing the nuances of a young executive's flattery. Valerius began to insinuate himself into the Spire project, ostensibly to streamline the development process and ensure its market viability. He'd sit in on design meetings, asking questions that at first seemed genuinely insightful. He'd review my blueprints, pore over my sustainability reports, and request detailed breakdowns of the integrated systems. I just want to understand every facet of this masterpiece, Elara, he claimed, so I can champion it effectively. I, in my naive dedication to the project, saw this as positive engagement. I was proud of my work and eager to share its complexities, to ensure its vision was understood. I even found myself mentoring him, explaining the intricate balance between aesthetic form and functional engineering, sharing the 10 years of research and passion that had culminated in the Spire. I trusted him. I saw him as a valuable ally, a conduit between my technical brilliance and the financial backing it needed. The red flags, in retrospect, were their subtle whispers I chose to ignore. He started requesting access to my personal files, the ones containing my early sketches, my proprietary algorithms for energy efficiency, my detailed material sourcing. Just for background, Elara, he'd explain, for the investor prospectus, we need to present a cohesive narrative of the project's evolution. He'd often ask for digital copies, citing convenience. I, meticulously organized, always provided them. Then there were the late-night emails, the urgent requests for specific data points after everyone else had gone home, usually when I was the only one still in the office, hunched over a model, lost in thought. He'd commend my dedication, my unwavering commitment. It felt good, in a way, to be appreciated, to know my efforts weren't going unnoticed by the higher-ups. As the final review approached, the pressure mounted. I was working around the clock, refining every detail, preparing my presentation. My body, though still resilient, began to feel the strain. My eyes were perpetually tired, my shoulders perpetually stiff. Valerius noticed. Elara, he said one afternoon, finding me slumped over my desk, a half-eaten sandwich beside a stack of schematics. You look utterly exhausted. You've given everything to this. And it shows. You need a break. A real one. He suggested a week off. Go somewhere peaceful. Recharge. The final review is a big one, and we need you at your sharpest. I'll handle final logistical preparations. Make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. His concern seemed genuine, almost paternal. He even offered to cover some of the expenses for a wellness retreat he recommended in Sedona, Arizona. Consider a bonus, he smiled, for bringing us to the precipice of greatness. Sedona sounded like heaven. The red rocks, the quiet, the chance to simply breathe. I hesitated, worried about leaving the project so close to the finish line. But Valerius was insistent, persuasive. Trust me, Elara, I've got this. You deserve this. You've earned this. He even gave me a personalized itinerary, complete with meditation sessions and hiking trails. His thoroughness was, in a twisted way, impressive. It disarmed me. After all, what could possibly go wrong in a single week? I was weary, and the thought of a complete disconnect, even for a few days, was alluring. I packed my bags, left my cats with a trusted friend, and flew to Arizona, my mind still buzzed with the Spire, but my body aching for rest. The desert was breathtaking. The silence was a balm. For 3 days, I hiked and meditated, and allowed the tension to slowly drain from my muscles. I even turned off my work phone, a rare luxury. On the fourth day, a strange unease began to creep in. It wasn't about the spire itself, but a nagging feeling, a discordant note in the otherwise peaceful symphony of the desert. I couldn't shake it. Against my better judgment, I turned my phone back on, just to check. My inbox exploded, not with Archeon emails, but with a flood of news alerts, industry bulletins, and congratulations from colleagues. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. The headline screamed, Archeon Dynamics unveils revolutionary Verdant Spire, a game changer for urban sustainability. Valerius Croft, the visionary behind Chicago's next iconic skyscraper. Croft's Verdant Spire to redefine urban living. Each headline was a punch to the gut, each image a twist of the knife. There on every screen were photos of Valerius Croft, standing proudly beside a gleaming architectural model of my Verdant Spire. He was smiling, basking in the glow of cameras, shaking hands with city officials and prominent investors. The model was identical to mine, down to the intricate details of the plant walls and the unique curvature of the facade. His presentation, delivered just yesterday, was lauded as a masterclass in innovation and foresight. He was being hailed as a genius, a visionary. My vision, my genius, my work. My hands trembled so violently I could barely hold the phone. The desert air, previously a gentle caress, now felt like a suffocating blanket. I scrolled furiously, searching for any mention of my name. There was none, not a single citation, not a single acknowledgement of the decade I had poured into this project. It was as if I had ceased to exist. A cold, visceral rage, unlike anything I had ever known, began to simmer beneath my skin. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound sense of violation, a theft of my very identity. I booked the first flight back to Chicago, my serene retreat abruptly transformed into a crucible of simmering fury. The journey was a blur of white-knuckled tension, my mind replaying every conversation, every interaction with Valerius, each one now twisted into a calculated deception. His praise, his concern, his insistence on my well-deserved break. It was all a meticulously orchestrated plan to get me out of the way, to steal the spotlight, to claim my legacy as his own. I arrived back in Chicago late at night. The city lights, usually a comforting embrace, now seemed to mock me, twinkling with the brilliance of a future that had been stolen. I went straight to Archeon, ignoring the security guard's raised eyebrows. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the servers. I walked directly to my workstation, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm. My meticulously organized files, my blueprints, my digital archives. Everything was gone. My computer wiped clean. My physical models vanished. Even the framed photos of iconic buildings I had designed were gone from my desk. The space was eerily sterile, as if I had never existed there. Then a new, polished plaque on the wall caught my eye. It was for Valerius Croft, chief architect and head of development. Below it, a framed press release emblazoned with Archeon's logo announced his promotion and celebrated his groundbreaking design for the Verdant Spire. It even had a quote from the CEO, praising Valerius's unparalleled vision. My world tilted. The air in my lungs felt like broken glass. I was not merely pushed aside. I had been erased. My legacy, my future, my very professional existence had been systematically dismantled, taken apart piece by piece, and reassembled under Valerius Croft's name. He hadn't just stolen my project. He had stolen my identity. The next morning, an email, cold and impersonal, awaited me in my personal inbox. It was from HR. My services were no longer required. Due to restructuring, my position had been eliminated. There was no severance, no pension, just a terse instruction to collect my personal effects, if there were any left, by the end of the day. I stood there in my empty apartment, the silence deafening, the echoes of a life now shattered. 65 years old, no job, no savings to speak of. My pension, tied to my employment, was now effectively gone, and the defining work of my life stolen by a man I had trusted, mentored, and, in my naive way, respected. Despair, a heavy, suffocating blanket, threatened to consume me. I looked at the city outside my window, the buildings I had helped to design, the skyline I had contributed to, and felt like a phantom, utterly invisible. I felt old, used up, discarded. The thought of giving up, of simply fading away, was a potent, dangerous whisper in my ear. But as the initial wave of grief subsided, something else began to stir. Deep within me, beneath the rubble of my ruined career and shattered trust, a tiny ember began to glow. It was a spark of righteous fury, a cold, hard resolve that refused to be extinguished. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, at the tired lines around my eyes, the silver in my hair, and saw not a defeated woman, but a survivor I had spent my life building. Now I would build something else. A case, a reckoning. Valerius Croft had underestimated me. He had taken my work, my reputation, my future, but he hadn't taken my mind, and he certainly hadn't taken my will. He was about to find out what a woman with nothing left to lose truly meant. The game, I realized, had just begun, and I was going to play it to win. The silence in my apartment was a physical presence, pressing it on me, heavy and suffocating. 65 years, and it felt like I was back at square one, but worse, stripped of dignity, of legacy, of even the barest financial security. The city outside, a glittering tapestry of lights, felt alien, mocking. Every skyscraper, every meticulously designed facade, was a reminder of what I had lost, what had been stolen. For a long moment, I allowed the despair to wash over me. It was a dark, inviting current, promising oblivion, an end to the gnawing pain. My two rescue cats, Nimbus and Zephyr, usually a source of comfort, seemed to sense my desolation, watching me with wide, unblinking eyes from their perch on the windowsill. I stroked Nimbus's soft fur, feeling the vibration of his purr, a fragile anchor in a world that had suddenly come unmoored. But then, as the last vestiges of self-pity began to recede, something else stirred within me. It wasn't the searing heat of anger, not yet. It was a cold, hard knot of resolve, a refusal to be vanquished. Valerius Croft had tried to erase me, but had forgotten one crucial thing. I was an architect. I built things. And if my life had been demolished, I would rebuild it, not with steel and glass, but with evidence and justice. The first step was an inventory of the wreckage, both internal and external. My personal funds were meager. The pension I had relied on was gone, tied directly to my employment at Archeon. My savings, modest and secure, would barely last a year if I was careful. The thought of finding another job at my age, especially with black mark from a corporate titan like Archeon, was laughable. Valerius had not just stolen my work. He had systematically dismantled my future. But he hadn't taken my mind, and he hadn't taken my meticulous habits. I started with my home office, a small, sunlit room overlooking a quiet street in Lincoln Park. Unlike my office at Archeon, this space was mine. Over the years, I kept personal backups of critical work, an architect's innate paranoia about data loss overriding corporate protocols. My old desktop computer hummed to life, a comforting word in the oppressive silence. Its hard drive, though not cutting edge, contained a trove of information. The first thing I looked for was my personal archive of the Verdant Spire. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to unearth files. Early concept sketches dating back a decade, hand-drawn schematics scanned into high-resolution images, detailed calculations for the geothermal systems, proprietary algorithms for optimizing light and airflow through the vertical farms, correspondence with environmental consultants, and even video logs of my early 3D models. These weren't just professional documents. They were a diary of my obsession, my intellectual fingerprints pressed firmly onto every pixel. Each file I opened was a jolt, a fresh stab of betrayal, but also a renewed surge of defiance. This wasn't just my work. It was me. I clicked through countless drafts, watching the Spire evolve from a nascent idea into a breathtaking reality on my screen. I had documented everything, often redundantly, out of habit and a deep-seated belief in accountability. My personal cloud storage, my external hard drives, even an ancient zip drive I kept purely for sentimental reasons. All contained pieces of the puzzle. I spent the next 2 days in a blur, fueled by strong coffee and a burning need for vindication, cross-referencing, organizing, and securing every scrap of data. As I worked, I pieced together the timeline of Valerius's infiltration, the request for background information, the urgent late-night data points, the insistence on digital copies. They weren't acts of diligence, but calculated acts of theft. He had systematically harvested my intellectual property, like a parasitic vine slowly strangling its host. His charm, his praise, his supposed concern for my well-being, all a carefully crafted facade to lull me into complacency. The week in Sedona, a gift, a bonus, was merely the final, elegant stroke of his deception, ensuring I was far away, unable to intervene, while he unveiled my life's work as his own. The depth of his cunning was breathtaking, sickening. With a preliminary cache of evidence secured, my next step was to understand the enemy, Valerius Croft. I scoured the internet, not just for news about the Verdant Spire, but for anything on him. His public persona was impeccable, a rising star, a visionary, a man of profound integrity. The articles gush about his bold leadership and unwavering commitment to sustainability. He was everywhere, on business news channels and glossy magazines, his face beaming with an almost beatific confidence. He was presenting the Verdant Spire as if it had sprung fully formed from his own brilliant mind. He even had a slick, professionally produced video detailing the inspiration behind the project, complete with soaring orchestral music and dramatic drone shots of my designs. The sheer audacity of it made my stomach clench. He had not just stolen my project. He had stolen my narrative, my soul. I needed to see him, to hear him speak, to witness his deceit with my own eyes. A quick search revealed he was scheduled to give a keynote address at the Chicago Architecture Foundation's annual symposium, less than a week away. The topic? The future of urban sustainability, a vision for the Verdant Spire. The irony was a bitter pill. The symposium was held in a magnificent hall in the Loop, usually a place of inspiration for me. Now, it felt like an arena where I was to be publicly executed. I dressed plainly, an anonymous figure in the packed auditorium, sitting far back, observing. The air hummed with anticipation. When Valerius strode onto the stage, a hush fell. He looked even more polished in person, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his silver hair catching the stage lights, his smile radiating charisma. He began to speak, his voice smooth and resonant, weaving a captivating tale of inspiration, of a chance encounter with a homeless man that ignited his passion for urban renewal, of late-night sketching in solitude, of a sudden epiphany that led to the Spire's revolutionary design. Each word was a fresh lie, a chisel chipping away at my heart. He spoke with such conviction, such passion, that I could see the audience hanging on his every word, captivated. He even mimicked some of my favorite architectural phrases I had uttered countless times in design meetings. He was not just stealing my work. He was stealing my voice, my very essence. A wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to scream, to stand up and expose him, but I knew it would be futile. A lone, elderly woman shouting accusations would be dismissed as deranged. I had no public platform, no credibility left. He had ensured that. He projected images of the Spire, my meticulously rendered visions, on the massive screen behind him, pointing out features with proprietorial pride. This living facade, he gestured, my innovation, draws inspiration from biomimicry. He used my term. He claimed my innovation. As the presentation ended a thunderous applause, Valerius accepted accolades with practiced humility, shaking hands, signing autographs. He was a rock star, a prophet of sustainable design. I slipped out of the hall, my hands trembling, my mind a maelstrom of emotions. The rage was no longer cold. It was a volcanic inferno. I would not let him get away with this. The next morning, I began the arduous task of seeking legal counsel. My first call was to a prominent law firm specializing in intellectual property. The receptionist was polite but firm. A consultation would cost a substantial retainer, and they would need to review extensive documentation before even considering taking the case. When I mentioned Archeon Dynamics and Valerius Croft, I sensed a subtle shift in her tone, a hint of caution. I tried a smaller firm, then another. The pattern was the same. Lawyers, even those who initially showed interest, became hesitant once I laid out the scope of Valerius's power and Archeon's resources. Ms. Vance, one attorney, a kind but weary man named Lysander Thorne, told me gently, "This is a formidable opponent. Archeon has an army of corporate lawyers. You be going up against a Goliath, and frankly, without significant financial resources for litigation, it's an uphill battle. They can bury you in paperwork, drag it out for years." He advised me to find an indisputable, smoking gun piece of evidence, something beyond just my word against his. His words, though disheartening, were a cold splash of reality. I wasn't just fighting Valerius. I was fighting an entire corporate machine. I realized I couldn't afford a high-powered legal team. My only path was to build such an unassailable case that no lawyer, however intimidated by Archeon, could refuse it. I needed more than my meticulously kept files. I needed something external, something that directly implicated Valerius in the theft, not just the presentation of my work. I started digging deeper, looking for anything that might connect Valerius to an earlier iteration of the project or even to a pattern of behavior. I remembered a junior architect, Kaelen Rourke, a bright, idealistic young man I had mentored extensively on the Verdant Spire. He had joined the project about 5 years ago, fresh out of university, and I'd always appreciated his keen eye for detail and his relentless optimism. He was a true believer in the Spire's vision. I found Kaelen on LinkedIn, still working at Archeon. His profile listed him as a senior project designer. There was a photo of him, looking a little older, a little more worn, but still with that spark in his eyes. I hesitated. Reaching out to him was a risk. He was still within Archeon's orbit, potentially beholden to Valerius. But he knew the Spire's history, knew my involvement. He had seen my early sketches, sat in on my design charrettes, helped me refine structural elements. He was a witness. I drafted a careful email, making no accusations, merely expressing my disappointment at leaving Archeon and my curiosity about the Spire's progress. I asked if he was still involved. It was a fishing expedition, a cautious probe into potentially hostile territory. I waited, holding my breath. A day passed. Then two. No reply. I felt a pang of despair. Had he been bought off? Intimidated? Or simply forgotten me, replaced by the dazzling persona of Valerius Croft? Then late one evening, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number, a text message. Asterisk, Elara, it's Kaelen. Can't talk on work channels. Call me tomorrow, 7 a.m. This number. Don't use your usual phone. Use a burner. Asterisk. My heart leaped. The message was terse, cautious, almost conspiratorial. A burner phone? That meant Kaelen was afraid. Afraid of Valerius. Afraid of Archeon. It also meant he had something to tell me. This was it. My first real lead, a crack in Valerius's impenetrable wall. The next morning before dawn, I bought a cheap prepaid phone and a new SIM card from a convenience store a few blocks away. My hands trembled as I dialed Kaelen's number exactly at 7 a.m. He answered on the first ring, his voice low, strained. "Elara? Thank God it's you. I wasn't sure you'd get my message." "Kaelen, what's going on? What happened?" He sighed, a long, weary sound. "It's worse than you know, Elara. Much worse. Valerius, he didn't just steal your work. He's been systematically erasing anyone who could challenge him. After you left, a lot of us who worked closely with you on the Spire were reassigned. Or worse, some were let go, citing performance issues. I was lucky. I was too deep into the technical drawings, too critical to replace quickly, but they isolated me." "Who is they, Kaelen?" "Just Valerius." "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's bigger than him. Elara, he has backing, powerful backing. There are whispers in the firm, hushed conversations. He's connected to the board, to some of the major investment groups. He's untouchable. He has everyone terrified. He even brought in his own people, new hires who are fiercely loyal to him. They're like a private army, pushing his narrative, making sure no one questions anything." "What about the actual design, Kaelen? The technical specifications? Is he even capable of understanding what he's claiming?" "That's the thing," Kaelen said, a note of desperation in his voice. "He doesn't understand it. He talks the talk, but he doesn't know the Spire. He fumbles details, misquotes calculations, but no one dares to correct him. He has a way of making you feel expendable. And he has a team of people now, new faces, who are effectively rebuilding the whole project under his name, using your original files as a template, but optimizing them, as they say, for Valerius Croft's vision. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just stolen my work. He was actively corrupting it, twisting it, forcing others to become complicit in his lie. Kaelen, I said, my voice tight with a mixture of fear and fury. Do you have anything? Any proof? Any original files that haven't been optimized? There was a long pause, filled only with a faint crackle of the burner phone. I might. I have some older drafts. And I kept a personal log of my contributions, my progress reports, all cross-referenced to your original schematics. I felt something was off. Even before you left, I started documenting things, just in case. A flicker of hope ignited within me, fragile but persistent. Kaelen, that could be everything. Could you get them to me? It won't be easy, he replied, his voice still tense. They monitor everything. Every email, every download. I'll have to be extremely careful. And I don't know what kind of risk I'm taking here. If they find out, I understand, Kaelen. Just be careful. Your safety is paramount. But if you can, it could change everything. I'll try, Elara. I'll try my best. But there's something else you need to know. Something I overheard a few days ago. Something that made my blood run cold. What is it? I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard Valerius talking to one of his new development strategists, a man named Solon Reed. They were discussing how to handle any potential dissenters or troublemakers who might try to undermine the Spire's narrative. Solon mentioned a preemptive strategy. He said Valerius had contingencies for every scenario, and that he knew how to make problems disappear. I don't know exactly what he meant, but the way he said it, it wasn't just about legal battles. Elara, it sounded like a threat, and it sounded like it was aimed at you. The receiver felt suddenly cold in my hand. Valerius wasn't just a thief. He was a predator, ruthless and utterly without conscience. He wasn't just stealing my future. He was actively trying to eliminate me from the equation, perhaps permanently. My resolve, which had been tempered in the fires of betrayal, now hardened into something unbreakable. He had chosen to make this a war, and he had just shown me his first weapon. I was alone, outmatched, and facing an enemy who would stop at nothing. But I was also Elara Vance, and I had just found my first ally, and I had absolutely nothing left to lose. The game had truly begun, and I was ready to fight for my life. The receiver felt suddenly cold in my hand, its cheap plastic a stark contrast to the sophisticated technology I'd once commanded. Valerius wasn't just a thief. He was a predator, ruthless and utterly without conscience. He wasn't just stealing my future. He was actively trying to eliminate me from the equation, perhaps permanently. My resolve, which had been tempered in the fires of betrayal, now hardened into something unbreakable. He had chosen to make this a war, and he had just shown me his first weapon. I was alone, outmatched, and facing an enemy who would stop at nothing. But I was also Elara Vance, and I had just found my first ally, and I had absolutely nothing left to lose. The game had truly begun, and I was ready to fight for my life. The crackle of Kaelen's voice on the burner phone had been a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. A preemptive strategy make problems disappear. The words echoed in my mind, cold and sharp. Valerius wasn't just playing a corporate game. He was playing for keeps. And I, unknowingly, had become his primary problem. My architect's brain, trained to analyze complex systems and anticipate structural stresses, immediately kicked into overdrive. This wasn't about blueprints anymore. It was about survival. My first priority, secure Kaelen's evidence. My second, understand the depth of Valerius's power and the nature of the threat. My third, build a defense and then a counterattack. Kaelen had given me specific instructions for our meeting. Union Station, the Great Hall, precisely at 2 p.m. the following day. Look for the man reading a copy of Architectural Digest. Holding upside down, he'd texted an hour later, a touch of his old, mischievous self shining through the fear. I'll be wearing a dark blue scarf. It was a plan born of paranoia, perfect for the new reality I found myself in. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I didn't know what information Kaelen had, but I knew it would be dangerous. I needed to move unseen, to become a ghost in the city I knew so intimately. I dug out an old, nondescript trench coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and dark sunglasses, a costume for anonymity. I charged a burner phone, cleared my apartment of anything that could easily identify me, and double-checked the security on my personal computer, now my only archive. Nimbus and Zephyr, sensing the shift in my demeanor, followed me from room to room, their golden eyes watchful. The next day, the chill wind off Lake Michigan seemed to carry a new menace. I arrived at Union Station an hour early, blending into the ebb and flow of commuters, travelers, and tourists. I chose a bench near the grand staircase, my back to a solid wall, offering a wide view of the Great Hall. My eyes, honed by decades of observing spatial dynamics, scanned the crowd, searching for anything out of place, any lingering gaze, any figure that seemed too still or too interested in its surroundings. It was a skill I'd used to spot architectural flaws, now repurposed for human threats. At 1:55 p.m., my heart thumped a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A man, young but with a weary slump to his shoulders, walked into the hall. He wore a dark blue scarf, and his hands, held upside down, was a copy of Architectural Digest. It was Kaelen. He looked thinner, his face etched with worry. He moved with nervous energy, his eyes darting around the cavernous space. My gaze swept the area behind him, but detected nothing overtly suspicious. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I rose slowly, deliberately, and walked toward the coffee stand, a natural trajectory that would intersect Kaelen's path. As I passed him, I kept my eyes fixed forward, a practiced nonchalance on my face. "Coffee, Kaelen," I murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. "Black, 2 sugars." He flinched, then nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes still scanning. He continued his slow walk toward the bank of lockers. I ordered a black coffee, added 2 sugars, and waited. My hand trembled slightly as I stirred, the clink of the spoon against the ceramic cup echoing the anxiety in my chest. A few minutes later, Kaelen returned, walking purposefully past me. As he did, he subtly brushed against my side. I felt the cold, hard press of a USB stick in my palm. My fingers closed around it instantly, tucking it deep into my coat pocket. "Good luck, Elara," he whispered, his voice hoarse, without looking at me. "Be careful. They're watching everyone." He walked out of the station without a backward glance. I watched him go, then took a long, slow sip of my coffee, allowing the heat to ground me. My eyes continued their sweep of the hall. Nothing. No sudden movements. No one following him. Had we been successful, or were Valerius's eyes simply too good to detect? I didn't go straight home. Instead, I boarded a random CTA bus, riding it for several stops, then transferred to a different line, making several convoluted detours designed to shake any potential tail. My architectural knowledge of the city's labyrinthine transit system, its hidden alleys and less traveled routes, suddenly felt invaluable. It was a perverse comfort, transforming my urban expertise into a tool for evasion. Back in the relative sanctuary of my apartment, I locked the door, drew the blinds, and placed the burner phone in a Faraday bag I'd fashioned from aluminum foil. My old desktop hummed to life. I inserted the USB drive. It contained a single encrypted folder. Kaelen had anticipated everything. The password was a sequence of architectural terms only he and I would know, a private language we developed over years of collaboration. The folder burst open, revealing a treasure trove. It wasn't just older drafts of the Verdant Spire, though those were there, time-stamped and undeniably mine. There were internal memos, stripped of official headers, but clearly sourced from Archeon servers. One memo, dated a month after Valerius joined the firm, outlined a strategic realignment of project leadership for high-profile initiatives, effectively giving Valerius oversight of my project. Another, a heavily redacted email chain, discussed accelerated IP transfer protocols and streamlining ownership structures for the Spire. The language was deliberately vague, but the implication was clear. They were laying the groundwork to steal my design. Then I found Kaelen's personal log. It was a meticulously kept diary of his work on the Spire, cross-referenced to my original schematics and his own observations. He documented every design meeting, every change request, every interaction with Valerius. He'd noted Valerius's increasingly frequent requests for access to master files and early concept development records. He'd even recorded specific instances where Valerius had misrepresented technical details or claimed credit for Kaelen's and my solutions. It was a damning narrative, unfolding in precise, chronological detail. But the most chilling discovery was a series of encrypted communications, apparently forwarded from a secure internal messaging system. These weren't about the Spire's design. They were about risk mitigation and asset protection. Several messages mentioned a Mr. Solon Reed, referring to him as a special consultant for high-level corporate security. One message, dated just a week before my forced vacation, was particularly unsettling. Reed has confirmed Elara Vance's travel itinerary. Full operational readiness for Project Nightingale initiated. Target will be off-site and isolated. Proceed with asset transfer and narrative control. All dissenters to be managed. Reed's team on standby for any complications. Project Nightingale. Asset transfer. Narrative control. Complications. The euphemisms were chilling. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was a well-funded, highly coordinated operation. Valerius hadn't just gotten lucky. He had orchestrated a sophisticated takedown. And Reed's team for complications confirmed Kaelen's warning. Solon Reed was not just a strategist. He was an enforcer. My hands clenched around the mouse. I immediately searched for Solon Reed. His public profile was sparse. A former military intelligence operative, then a private security consultant, specializing in corporate risk assessment and hostile takeover defense. The euphemisms in his professional life were as opaque as in the Archeon memos. There were no photos, no personal details, just a list of high-profile clients and vague descriptions of his services. But a deeper dive, using some of the more obscure search engines I'd learned about in my younger, more curious days, began to pull back the curtain. I found a few mentions buried in old, archived news articles from smaller, regional papers of a Solon Reed involved in a controversial incident years ago relating to a powerful land developer's aggressive acquisition tactics. The incident involved allegations of intimidation, property damage, and the mysterious disappearance of a vocal community organizer. The charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, but the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't just about protecting corporate assets. It was about eliminating human obstacles. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Valerius wasn't just trying to protect his stolen legacy. He was willing to go to extreme lengths to silence anyone who challenged him. And I was at the top of that list. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a glass cage. I looked out the window at the familiar Chicago skyline, and it no longer offered comfort. It felt like a hostile entity, its steel and glass reflection of the cold, hard ambition that now threatened my life. The next morning, I moved, not to flee, but to reposition. I called an old friend, a retired art history professor named Corbon, who lived in a quiet, unassuming brownstone in Logan Square. He was a widower, perpetually traveling, and his ground-floor apartment, with its separate entrance and quiet backyard, was usually empty. I explained only that I needed a temporary, secure space for a sensitive project, omitting the life-and-death stakes. Corbon, ever the eccentric intellectual, was delighted to help, giving me the keys and wishing me well. The apartment was small, filled with books and antique furniture, but it was discreet. I brought only essentials: my laptop, the burner phone, Kaelen's USB drive, a few changes of clothes, and a handful of canned goods. Nimbus and Zephyr, sensing the urgency in my movements, watched me pack with quiet concern. I hated leaving them, but their safety was paramount. I arranged for my trusted friend, who also had my apartment keys, to check on them daily, giving her a vague story about an unexpected consultancy opportunity out of town. I set up my new command center in the apartment's back room, which overlooked a small, overgrown garden. I bought a cheap, used monitor, a wireless mouse, and a small, encrypted external hard drive. I created a secure, offline network, severing any direct digital connection to my old life. My architect's mind, accustomed to precision and foresight, began to map out my next moves. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was building a case, yes, but also a strategy for war. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in Kaelen's data, cross-referencing it with my own archives. I compiled a detailed timeline of Valerius's infiltration, the systematic dismantling of my project, and the calculated theft of my intellectual property. I began to identify specific individuals within Archeon, those new hires Kaelen had mentioned, who were complicit in Valerius's scheme. They were not just employees. They were a loyal cadre, strategically placed to protect his stolen empire. The deeper I delved, the clearer the picture became. The Verdant Spire wasn't just a building to Valerius. It was a stepping stone. It was his vehicle to consolidate power, not just within Archeon, but within a larger network of influential developers and investors, the powerful backing Kaelen had hinted at. The Spire, with its promise of unprecedented profits and prestige, was the bait. Valerius was building an empire on my stolen vision, and Solon Reed was a shadow, ensuring no one interfered. I had copies of everything, redundant backups stored in multiple, discrete locations. My goal shifted from simply recovering my legacy to exposing the entire corrupt network. Justice for the Spire would be a byproduct of dismantling Valerius Croft's criminal enterprise. One evening, as I was cross-referencing a cryptic financial allocation with internal project code, a detail caught my eye. It was a transfer of a significant sum labeled development consulting to an offshore account. The date of the transfer coincided precisely with a new, highly accelerated phase of the Spire's construction, announced by Valerius weeks after my dismissal. This wasn't just about stealing a design. It was about leveraging a stolen design for illicit financial gains, perhaps even money laundering. The rabbit hole went far deeper than I could have imagined. This was a conspiracy, not just a theft. My new resolve hardened. I was no longer an architect, but an investigator, a strategist, a hunter. Valerius Croft had underestimated the woman he had tried to erase. He had stolen my life's work, but in doing so, he had ignited a firestorm he could never control. I looked at the files on my screen. Evidence of theft, fraud, and potentially far worse. My next move was critical. I needed to connect the offshore accounts to Valerius directly, to find the irrefutable link that would expose his entire operation. It would be dangerous, requiring a foray into the dark underbelly of financial forensics, a world far removed from the elegant precision of architectural design. But I was ready. Just as I zoomed in on the details of the offshore transaction, a faint scratching sound came from the back garden just outside my window. It was subtle, like a branch scraping against the glass in the wind. But there was no wind, and the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. My breath hitched in my throat. I froze, my eyes darting to the window. The overgrown branches of an old oak tree cast deep shadows, making it impossible to see clearly. The scratching stopped, followed by a barely audible click like a latch. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic warning drum. I reached for the heavy antique letter opener I'd placed on the table, my only weapon. Then a voice, low and smooth, drifted through the thin glass, a whisper that seemed to bypass my ears and chill me to the bone. "Ms. Vance, we know you're in there. We just want to talk." It was Solon Reed. He had found me. "Ms. Vance, we know you're in there. We just want to talk." Solon Reed's voice, low and smooth, drifted through the thin glass, a whisper that seemed to bypass my ears and chill me to the bone. He had found me. The heavy antique letter opener in my hand suddenly felt pathetically small, a child's toy against the unseen threat lurking in the Logan Square garden. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic warning drum. I froze, my eyes darting to the window. The overgrown branches of an old oak tree cast deep shadows, making it impossible to see clearly, but I knew he was there, a predator scenting his prey. My architect's brain, however, didn't panic. Instead, it accelerated, analyzing the space around me, mapping escape routes, assessing structural weaknesses, just as it would for a collapsing building. Corbon's brownstone was old, built in the late 1800s, with multiple egress points, a warren of rooms, and a layout that prioritized privacy over modern security. The back room, where I was, had a single window looking onto the garden, a heavy, bolted door leading to the main hallway, and another, less obvious door, tucked behind a tall bookcase, that connected to a small, dusty storage area. Beyond that storage area, I remembered, was a narrow, seldom-used service alley that led to an adjacent street. "We don't want any trouble, Miss Vance," Reed continued, his voice closer now, the scratching sound returning, more insistent. It wasn't a branch. It was the sound of something being pried, a lock, a latch, the window itself. He wasn't talking. He was announcing his presence, trying to intimidate me, to make me break. I wouldn't. My eyes scanned the room. Laptop, burner phone, Kaelen's USB drive, the trinity of my revenge. I snatched them, tucking them into the deep pockets of my trench coat. My gaze fell on an old, heavy wooden armchair near the window. Not a weapon, but a distraction. With a surge of adrenaline I didn't know I possessed, I grabbed the chair, twisted, and heaved it toward the window. It crashed against the glass with a satisfying smash, shattering the pane and sending shards scattering into the garden. "What the—" Reed's voice, now laced with surprise, cut off. That was my cue. Not to flee through the broken window, but to create a diversion. I didn't wait to hear more. I darted to the hidden door behind the bookcase, fumbling for the old iron handle. It was stiff, groaning as I wrestled it open. I slipped into the dusty storage room, pulling the door shut behind me, plunging myself into near total darkness. The sounds in the garden were muffled now, but I could hear heavy footsteps, the rustle of leaves, a low curse. They were coming for the broken window. The storage room smelled of mothballs and forgotten history. My fingers, guided by memory and touch, found the latch for the alley door. It was a rusty bolt, and I strained, using all my strength, until it scraped open with a screech that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. I slipped out into the cool night air of the alley, heart pounding. My escape route was familiar to my architect's eye. This alley, like many in older Chicago neighborhoods, was a narrow, often neglected conduit between the structured rows of brownstones. It was dark, lined with overflowing dumpsters and rickety fences, but it was also my highway to freedom. I moved quickly, silently, my practical, sensible shoes making little noise on the cracked asphalt. I didn't run. I moved with purpose, a swift, controlled gait, merging into the shadows. I emerged onto a brightly lit side street, pausing for a fraction of a second behind a parked car, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Nothing. Reed and his team, whoever they were still focused on Corbon's garden. They had underestimated me. They expected an old woman, frail and terrified. They had found an architect who knew how to navigate complex structures, even when those structures were the streets of a city. My destination was vague, but my direction was clear, away from anything known, anything traceable. I hailed a taxi several blocks away, giving a generic downtown address, then jumped out several blocks short, melting into the late-night pedestrian traffic. From there, I took another bus, then another, crisscrossing the city like a rogue electron, until I was sure any trail was cold. I ended up in a cheap, anonymous motel on the far south side, paying cash, using a false name gleaned from an old, forgotten design project. The room was sterile, smelling faintly of stale cigarette smoke and cleaning products, but it was safe. I locked the door, pushed a chair against it for good measure, and slumped onto the thin mattress. My body ached, but my mind was alight. Solon Reed knew I had something, and he was willing to break in to get it. That meant Kaelen's data was truly explosive. I needed to find someone who wasn't afraid of Valerius Croft or his corporate army. Someone who operated outside the system, but with the power to expose it. My thoughts kept returning to the lawyer, Xylia Thorne, who had warned me about Archeon's Goliath-like power. He'd mentioned needing an indisputable, smoking gun piece of evidence. I had that now, but he also said Archeon could bury me in paperwork. I needed something faster, more public. An idea, audacious and risky, began to form. I remembered reading an article years ago about a tenacious, independent investigative journalist named Xylia Thorne, no relation to Lysander, but a name that stuck. She had a reputation for fearlessly exposing corporate corruption, often facing down powerful interests. Her methods were unconventional, her network vast, and her articles hit like a sledgehammer. She was a lone wolf, less susceptible to corporate influence than a major news outlet. She published her work through a well-respected independent online journal. If anyone could take on Valerius Croft, it was Xylia. The next morning, I used the motel's public computer, carefully wiping my digital footprint afterward. I found Xylia Thorne's contact information. I wouldn't call her directly. It was too risky. Instead, I crafted a cryptic, anonymous email, sending it from a disposable account created for the purpose. Subject: regarding the Verdant Spire / Archeon Dynamics, a matter of urgency and public interest. Ms. Thorne, * your reputation precedes you. I believe you are uniquely equipped to investigate a matter of significant corporate malfeasance involving Archeon Dynamics and their highly publicized Verdant Spire project. The public narrative surrounding its visionary designer, Valerius Croft, is a meticulously constructed lie. The project itself is built on stolen intellectual property, and its financial backing involves deeply illicit activities, including offshore transfers and money laundering schemes. I possess irrefutable evidence, including original design files, internal communications detailing a sophisticated theft operation, Project Nightingale, and documentation of a highly aggressive risk mitigation specialist named Solon Reed, who is actively engaged in silencing any potential whistleblowers. My life has been threatened. I cannot come forward directly, but I am prepared to provide you with the necessary proof to expose this conspiracy. I propose a dead drop. I will leave an encrypted USB drive in a specific location. Details to follow only if you signal your interest. Your next article on your independent journal should include the phrase, "The foundations are crumbling," in its opening paragraph. If I see it, I will provide the drop location via the same anonymous email. Do not attempt to contact me directly. Time is of the essence. Lives are at stake. A concerned architect. I sent the email, feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. It was a leap of faith, a gamble, but it was my only shot. Now I waited. Every hour felt like a day. I kept the motel room dark, watching the news reports on the small, grainy TV. Seeing Valerius Croft's smirking face splashed across financial channels, still basking in the glow of his stolen triumph. The anger, cold and sharp, fueled my resolve. 2 days later, scrolling through news feeds on the public computer, I saw it. Xylia Thorne's latest article, examining the cracks in corporate transparency. The first paragraph began, "The foundations are crumbling, not just in the literal sense of our aging urban infrastructure, but in the very bedrock of corporate ethics, where transparency is often a facade for deeper machinations." She had responded. My heart leaped. I immediately sent a second anonymous email. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Lincoln Park Zoo. Small, red metal trash connects to the North Pond Bridge. USB drive wrapped in a faded blue scarf. Ensure no visible surveillance. I will be observing. The next morning, I was back in Lincoln Park, my old stomping grounds, but this time a phantom. I wore a different disguise, a wig, thick glasses, a nondescript parka. I positioned myself in a cafe overlooking the zoo entrance, nursing a lukewarm coffee, my eyes scanning the faces of everyone entering. At 9:55 a.m., Xylia Thorne arrived. She looked exactly as I imagined from her photos. Sharp, intelligent, with an intense gaze that seemed to miss nothing. She walked directly towards the North Pond Bridge, a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She moved with a practiced nonchalance, but her eyes, like mine, constantly swept her surroundings. She paused at the red metal trash can, ostensibly to adjust her bag. In a fluid movement, her hand dipped into the can, retrieved a small package, and vanished it into her bag. She didn't linger, didn't look around. She simply walked away, blending back into the morning crowds. I felt a profound sense of relief, followed by a renewed surge of urgency. The clock was ticking. Over the next few days, I stayed in my motel room, tracking Xylia's journal online. There were no new articles, no sudden exposés. My anxiety mounted. Had she dismissed the evidence? Was it not enough? Then, a week after the drop, an email arrived on my burner phone. It was from Xylia's personal, encrypted account, addressed to my anonymous email. A.C. Asterisk, the information you provided is explosive. It's even bigger than I anticipated. The financial connections alone could bring down several major players. Croft is just a visible head of a much larger beast. Reed's activities are particularly disturbing. I'm corroborating everything, but this is going to take time. The forces you're up against are immense. Are you willing to testify, even anonymously? It would significantly strengthen the case. Asterisk. Asterisk Xylia T. Asterisk. I typed a quick reply. Asterisk no. Too dangerous. Use the evidence. Protect yourself. Stay hidden. I will continue to provide anything I can. Asterisk. I had no intention of stepping into the light. My revenge wasn't about public acclaim. It was about Valerius's destruction. Xylia's next email was more detailed. Asterisk. I've started feeding anonymous tips to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the SEC, citing your documents. They're moving slowly, cautiously. They're wary of Archeon's political connections. This needs to go public, and soon. I'm preparing a full expose. It will hit the day after tomorrow. Are you safe? Asterisk. My stomach clenched. The day after tomorrow. That was it. The moment of truth. I replied, asterisk, as safe as I can be. Good luck, Xylia. Make it count. Asterisk. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of hypervigilance, glued to the news, my burner phone charged, my escape bag packed. I imagined Valerius, oblivious, strutting through Archeon, perhaps celebrating another minor victory, while the ground beneath him was about to give way. Then it happened. The headline flashed across every major news outlet, an earthquake rumbling through the corporate world. The Verdant lie. Investigative journalism exposes massive fraud, theft, and conspiracy at Archeon Dynamics. Valerius Croft implicated. Xylia's article was a masterpiece of investigative reporting. It laid out everything. The systematic theft of my designs detailed through Kaelen's logs and my original files. The intricate web of offshore accounts tracing back to Valerius and his powerful, shadowy investors, Project Nightingale and its chilling implications, and the documented history of Solon Reed's risk mitigation tactics, including the mysterious disappearances of community organizers from his past. She had meticulously pieced together the puzzle, using my evidence as the backbone, fortified by her own relentless digging. The article even included redacted images of my original blueprints alongside Valerius's official versions, highlighting the undeniable similarities. The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Archeon Dynamics stock plummeted. Major investors began pulling out. The City Planning Commission immediately halted the Verdant Spire project, launching an internal review. News channels were in a frenzy. Valerius Croft, once hailed as a visionary, was now vilified as a corporate con artist and a criminal. Within hours, the FBI and SEC, now under immense public pressure, issued warrants. Footage flooded the news. Valerius Croft, looking pale and disheveled, being led away in handcuffs from Archeon's gleaming headquarters, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The smug charisma was gone, replaced by raw, naked fear. He shouted denials, protests of a witch hunt, but his words were drowned out by the clamor of reporters. I watched it all unfold from my dingy motel room, a ghost witnessing her own vindication. A profound, almost spiritual calm settled over me. The raging inferno of my fury had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, clean ash. He was destroyed. His legacy, built on lies, had collapsed into ignominy, but there was still Solon Reed. Xylia's article had exposed his past, linking him to the mysterious disappearances and intimidation tactics. He was now a wanted man, not just by me, but by the authorities. He was a dangerous loose end. My architect's mind, always planning, always anticipating, had already laid a final trap. A week prior, after I learned Reed had found Corbon's apartment, I knew he would try again. He was a creature of habit, a professional. He would expect me to be hiding, to be vulnerable, but he wouldn't expect me to hunt him. I had used the dark web to send an anonymous, untraceable message to a known contact of Reed's, a minor fixer he sometimes used for surveillance. The message was simple. Asterisk, Valerius Croft has been compromised. Elara Vance has the original data. She is planning to meet a journalist at the old abandoned train yard on the west side, 3 a.m. tonight, to hand over the final evidence. Take her out. Final payment will be arranged. Asterisk, it was a setup designed to draw Reed out, to make him think he had an easy target, a desperate old woman making one last mistake. It preyed on his professional pride and his need to clean up loose ends for his now imprisoned boss. The journalist was a phantom. The final evidence was bait. I arrived at the old abandoned train yard an hour early, shrouded in darkness, my old trench coat a part of the shadows. The train yard was a relic of Chicago's industrial past, a labyrinth of rusted tracks, decaying warehouses and towering skeletal structures. It was a place I'd explored as a young architecture student, fascinated by its brutalist beauty and its forgotten potential. Now it was my hunting ground. I hid myself amidst a pile of derelict railway ties, my heart surprisingly steady. The cold night air invigorated me. I had a small, powerful flashlight, and my burner phone set to silent, ready. I knew Reed would scout the area, relying on his military training. But I knew this terrain better. I knew the echoes, the blind spots, the precarious footing. At precisely 3 a.m., a figure emerged from the deeper shadows, moving with an almost unnatural stealth. Solon Reed. He was lean, muscular, his movements precise and deadly. He held what looked like a silenced handgun. He was alone, overconfident, expecting to find a terrified old woman. He moved through the train yard, scanning, his eyes missing nothing obvious. But he missed the subtle cues, the way the sound carried off the corrugated metal, the specific angle of the moonlight reflecting off a puddle that would reveal a hidden approach. He was looking for a target. I was observing a system. As he neared the designated meeting point, a dilapidated boxcar, I enacted my plan. With my burner phone, I sent an anonymous text to the Chicago Police Department's gang unit, whose precinct was just a few blocks away. Asterisk, armed man. Suspicious activity. Old train yard, near the abandoned boxcar. Looks like a drug deal going down. Heavy firearm. Asterisk, the gang unit often patrolled this area, and they responded swiftly to such calls. Then, I triggered my own distraction. I had rigged a tripwire earlier, leading to a stack of empty metal barrels behind a pile of lumber about 50 yards from Reed. I tugged the thin fishing line. The barrels crashed down with a deafening clang that echoed through the vast yard. Reed spun around, his weapon raised, his tactical training kicking in. He moved toward the sound, his guard up, searching for a phantom threat. That's when I heard the sirens, faint at first, then growing rapidly louder. Red and blue lights began to cut through the distant darkness, approaching the train yard from multiple directions. Reed froze, his head snapping up. He realized he had been played. He turned, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an escape route, looking for me. Too late. Chicago police. Drop your weapon. Hands where I can see them. A voice boomed from the entrance of the train yard. Reed, cornered, hesitated for only a second. He was a professional, but he was also human. He tossed a handgun away, raising his hands, his face a mask of grim resignation. The police swarmed him, flashlights blinding, weapons drawn. I watched from my hidden vantage point, the chill resolution settling deep in my bones. Solon Reed, the shadow enforcer, was neutralized. I slipped away, a ghost vanishing into the pre-dawn mist, leaving the police to clean up the mess. My work was done. The next few weeks were a blur of news reports and legal proceedings. Valerius Croft was formally charged with wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy. The full extent of his network, the powerful investors who had backed him, began to unravel under the relentless scrutiny of the FBI and SEC, fueled by Xylia Thorne's continuous exposés. Archeon Dynamics, once a titan, was brought to its knees, facing multiple lawsuits and a complete overhaul of its leadership. The Verdant Spire project, my life's work, was placed indefinitely on hold, its future uncertain. My name, Elara Vance, eventually surfaced in Xylia Thorne's follow-up articles, not as a witness, but as the unseen architect, the true visionary behind the Spire, the wrong party whose courage had brought down an empire. There were calls for me to come forward, offers for interviews, inquiries about reclaiming my position, but I declined them all. I was done with that world. I retrieved Nimbus and Zephyr from my friend, whose relief at my safe return was palpable. She understood intuitively that I was changed, offering no questions, only quiet comfort. My apartment, once a sterile reminder of loss, now felt different. It was still my sanctuary, but I was no longer the same person who had lived there. I sat by the window, my cats purring contentedly on my lap, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The buildings I had designed, the city I had helped to shape, no longer looked the same to me. I saw not just steel and glass, but the hidden networks of power, the silent battles, the shadows where predators lurked. I had been vulnerable, then relentless, and now I was something else, a survivor, a ghost in the machine, a quiet observer. My old life, the one of blueprints and aesthetic perfection, was gone, but I had rebuilt myself, forged anew in the crucible of betrayal and vengeance. I had learned to navigate the dark currents beneath the city's glittering surface, to understand the true architecture of power. I was an architect still, but now I built unseen, dismantling corrupt structures, not just designing new ones. My work was quieter, more dangerous, and utterly vital. The world needed architects, not just for buildings, but for justice. And I, Elara Vance, was now ready to answer that call, on my own terms from the shadows. The game was over for Valerius Croft, but for me, a new, chilling chapter had just begun. The end.